Hi, everybody. Um, Welcome to the Renaissance Theater History Lecture. And I miss doing these in person and having group discussions and doing other things, but here we are. Um, Everyone's hopefully social distancing and self-isolating, and we're all getting through this. Just remember, you might hear my children playing in the background. I'm just going to keep going. I hope you're all doing well. And just a reminder before I get started that if you have any questions about any assignments, please feel free to email me or call my cell phone. I've given you the number over email a few times now, so really, I do not mind helping. That's what I'm here for. Please reach out if you need it. Okay, so my notes are over here. Here we are in the Renaissance. This is going to be where we stay for the rest of the semester. Excuse me. So we're going to first take a look at the Renaissance in Italy, the Italian Renaissance. That's what we're looking at this week. And then for the rest of the semester, we're going to look at the Spanish and French Renaissance eras and end with the English Renaissance, which brought us Shakespeare. So you might be a little more familiar with that one. All of these were taking place at the same time, but there we go. Every nation had its own theatrical advancements, so we're looking at the nations separately. With the Middle Ages being over now in Europe, strong nations formed, and for the first time in a long time, the continent was not held tightly under one strict religion. So theater is now not tied to religion anymore, and the professional theater is now developing. Theater as its own independent, standalone business, as I mentioned at the end of the Middle Ages lecture last week. Before we dive into just the Italian Renaissance specifically, I want to just talk a little bit about what the Renaissance in general was all about. So as I talked about at the end of last week's lecture, the Middle Ages were ending, and that meant feudalism was declining and cities were growing. Princes were enjoying increased power, and the church's dominance over learning and over life was being challenged. So there was this big shift, and all of these forces combined to become the basis for modern Western culture, and they also led us into the Renaissance. Okay. The Renaissance is associated with an interest in reviving all the ideals of the classical world. One, for instance, being the worth of humanity. People were interested now in valuing life and in valuing humanity as more than just a preparation for eternity. In the Middle Ages, the message was our entire purpose on this planet is to prepare for our eternal life, because the focus was so Christian based. But now that the church was losing power and the Renaissance was gaining, humanism, or valuing humanity for more than just that, for our other things that make us worthwhile, it actually led thinkers of the time back to studying classical Greece and classical Roman, because way back then that was the sort of philosophy, especially in Greece, that was being talked about and discussed and studied and believed in. So really, we are going back to Greece and Rome as the big influencers. So as this way of thinking grew, so did curiosity, and so did the spirit of adventure. The Renaissance was an era of expansion. People were exploring geographically, they were experimenting scientifically, they were inquiring philosophically, they were creating artistically. All of these things were encouraged and happening during the Renaissance. The goal in education was to create the universal human being. And what this meant was someone who was skilled in many, many fields. Someone who was skilled in science and politics and sports and art. A really well-rounded individual. You may have heard the expression a Renaissance man, and that's where that expression comes from, right? Someone who's a scientist and he's an athlete and he's a musician and he loves literature. That's a Renaissance man, or we could also call it just a Renaissance person. Um, it's sort of related to the idea of attending a liberal arts college, right? You have to take all these general education requirements aside from your major because the idea is that you're becoming this well rounded student of life, and not just zeroing in on one specific thing. Um, so that's the Renaissance in a nutshell. And before we move on to dig into the Italian Renaissance specifically, I just want to mention that you do have a Renaissance research project that's coming up that I'm assigning this week. The full project, final draft, is not due until 2 weeks from now, on the 27th of April. But I'm actually breaking it up into steps to help you kind of manage your time with it so it doesn't become a huge thing. So you're going to be doing some research and creating an outline this week. And then you're going to send that all to me so I can make sure you're on the right track. And then you're going to get the final product done for the next week. I'm posting that assignment in Blackboard for the folder for this week. You've probably already taken a peek at it. If you haven't, you will be. So that's the big project. Pay attention to the steps that I've outlined for you, and you'll be great. All right. The Renaissance had its greatest and earliest impact in Italy, where its impact on theater was huge.